Good morning, everybody. I'd like to start the class with a word of prayer. Dear Father, we ask that you would help me to be the teacher that I need to be. Help me to say the things that will help us to all grow and to understand you and to be more of what you want us to be. I have a failing, Lord, of being lazy, and we ask that you would help me to get that shaken off and getting back into doing the things that I should do. Bless all of the students, all of the people that are here. Help us to understand and to grow and to use this. In Jesus' name, amen. I was in a men's Bible class yesterday morning, and I was thinking about how long it's been since I've taught. And it's probably been around 5 years. And I will tell you that I'm slightly uncomfortable, nervous, whatever. And I had to offer to teach a lesson on something like Isaiah. So we're going to have fun. Isaiah is one of the major prophets in the Bible. There's only 3 or 4 of them. And it is a lot of very deep material. I'm not going to even attempt to go chapter by chapter. There's just too much stuff. And it's 66 chapters, and I can see you paying all kinds of great attention after a year and a quarter trying to keep up with Isaiah. Give me a break. I am a man who loves to teach history, however. And so we're going to be doing, I hope, this is my plan at least, to talk about Isaiah itself and history of what's going on around it for part of the class, and then talk about the things that Isaiah is trying to get us to understand and to learn for the rest of the class. This morning is going to be mostly just an introductory lesson with some history. If you looked, there is a sheet in back. Is this going to work for me? I'll find the right button, maybe. Well, I tried all 3 buttons and didn't do anything yet, so. Middle one? Big one. Yeah, nothing. Okay. I think that all of us should know some basic Bible history. If somebody starts talking to you about the flood, you should know whether that becomes before or after Abraham. If somebody talks about the period there in Egypt, you should know if that becomes before or after David. These kind of things are very basic. And they just give you an overview of the Bible. So I've got, this is something I got when I was in school preaching 47 years ago, something like that, 50 years ago, whatever it was. This is one of the first things they gave us was this 15 natural Bible periods. And I want us to be able to look at this and use it if it's helpful for you. Now, like I said, I printed some out there out and back. If you're going to take one, fine, take it. And if you use it, if you keep it, that's great. But if you're not going to use it, put it back out there after class. Somebody else might want it at another time. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I'm going to zip through these things, and then we'll try to get into Isaiah. Like mentioned here, like you have in the notes, there are 15 natural Bible periods. The first one is the antediluvial period, which is basically the time before the flood. It's from the creation to the flood. Then is the post-diluvian period, which is from the flood forward to the call of Abram. And then is the patriarchal period, which is from the call of Abram to the descent into Egypt. The Egyptian period, which includes the descent into Egypt until the crossing of the Red Seas. The period of the wandering, which includes everything up from the crossing of the Red Seas to the crossing of the Jordan. That would have been when they started conquering the nation. Then it was the period of the conquests, including the period from crossing the Red Sea, the appointment of the first judge. There's a period of the judges, which includes everything from the appointment of the first judge to the establishment of the kingdom. Period of the United Kingdom, Now, this is where we're starting to get into the area where we're going to be interested in this whole thing. The United Kingdom. And the United Kingdom is from the establishment of the kingdom with the first judge, Saul, till the division of the kingdom. And that would have been the first, second, third, fourth king, a gentleman by the name of Rehoboam, son of Solomon, who did some very stupid things. And the northern half of the country decided they're going to be their own country. They're not going to have anything to do with David's people. And they establish a second kingdom. That'll be the period of the dual kingdom, which includes the division of the kingdom, to the fall of Samaria. Then there's a period of Judah alone. Looks like I messed up my printing here a little bit. Period of Judah alone, which includes from the fall of Samaria to the fall of Jerusalem. Did you know Jerusalem fell? That Jerusalem was taken captive? There's a period of captivity, which includes from the fall of Jerusalem until the decree of Cyrus. This is one of the dates that we know exactly. If you look through here, you'll see a lot of approximately, about for dates. Period 10 and period 11, we know the exact dates that they began. The period of the restoration, we also know exactly when that happened. I missed one here, didn't I? There it is. I went too far now. Back one. Yeah, Judah, restoration, period of restoration, we're in the center. Which includes all from the decree of Cyrus until the end of Nehemiah's work, which ends the Old Testament. Then there's the period between the Testaments, which starts with the end of Nehemiah until John the Baptizer comes. Then there's the period of the Christ, which includes from the coming of John the Baptizer until Pentecost of Acts 2, when Jesus ascended into heaven. And we are now living in the 15th period, which is the period of the church. Now, the time Isaiah lived was during the divided kingdom, near the end of the divided kingdom, into the point of the time of Judah alone. Now, I did something stupid. I forgot my Bible. Give me a second. It's amazing how often we can teach a lesson nowadays and not have a Bible with us because we can print stuff out and we can have a computer up here, whatever. But from the very beginning of the book of Isaiah, it says, the vision of Isaiah, the son of Amoz, concerning Judah and Jerusalem, which he saw during the reigns of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. Well, he was reigning during that period at the end of the divided kingdom and at the beginning of the Judah alone. It's a period of time that it's a long time since David became king. Uzziah is actually the 11th king since David was king. Can you picture how long 10 generations is? Can you look back in your family 10 generations? My great grandfather, George Giddings, and his wife, Laura Tittle, came from St. Albans, England, to Ipswich, Massachusetts. I am the 10th generation since they came in 1636. So I can picture 10 generations. But I also think about that and I think how much mixture there would have been in my family genealogy and how much of what is in my family in 10 generations in the United States. We're looking at the time of Israel and Judah, and we're not looking at the time of Judah alone as well, but these people had been commanded by God. You don't marry outside of the tribe, you don't give your children in marriage or outside of the tribe, you stay amongst the Jews. So these people are, compared to my genealogy, those 10 generations, would have had a lot of intermixture. of a lot of intermingling of others. If you've been reading your Bible, you'll notice on the bottom here it says, you find Uzziah, depending on which version you're looking at, and for that matter, even the standard versions, if you start looking in First Chronicles and Second Chronicles and First Kings and Second Kings, you're going to find Uzziah mentioned also as Azariah. You might find it spelled differently, Ozias or Azarias. But he's all the same guy, and he is a direct descendant of David. I know I'm doing a lot of lecturing, and we're going to be doing some lecturing until we get to the point where we can start asking some questions. But if you have questions, throw a brick at me or something, get my attention, and I'll be glad to talk. The way that the divided kingdom happened was that after Solomon's death, his son Rehoboam offended the northern tribes, and the result was the formation of the two nations. Rehoboam became king. He was just a young man. And a group of people from the northern area, which became Israel, the blue area on the slide here, came to him and said, "Your father was very hard on us. Would make it easier on us, and we'll follow you." And Rehoboam went to the elders that had advised his father, and he said, "What should I do?" And they said, "Oh, make it easier on them. Let them know that you're a servant of the people. You're the king. You're the servant." And he thought, So he went and talked to the people of his own age, and they said, "Are you kidding me? You're the king. You can do anything you want to. Tell him that my little finger is thicker than my father's waist. I'm so much stronger than him. He might have scourged you with thorns. I'm going to scourge you with scorpions. You're going to be working so hard." And they said, "Forget it. We don't want anything to do with David or his family." And they formed the other country. That's why the northern nation was formed. It was called Israel. And Jeroboam, who had been one of Solomon's servants, became king. And he led Israel astray. First thing it says when you start talking about Jeroboam, you find him referred to over and over in the Bible as the one that led the people astray. Now, I know this picture isn't all that clear. I don't know if this will work or not. Let's see. This is supposed to be a button there somewhere. Okay. Right up there in the northern part, there's a little town of Dan. And down here, in the rather southern part, there's a little town of Bethel. What Jeroboam did to corrupt the nation of Israel, to corrupt the people of God, was Jeroboam rejected the worship of God in Jerusalem. Now, I have a theory. I mean, it doesn't say it anywhere in the Bible, but I have a theory, and I want you to think about my theory for just a moment. If you were King Jeroboam, and you had suddenly formed a separate nation, and your people all worshipped in the same place as the nation you just separated from, basically North Korea and South Korea, or I suppose I shouldn't say North and South Dakota, that wouldn't work, but he knew that if the people were going to continue to worship Jehovah, they're going to have to worship in Jerusalem. That's what was decided. And I think he was afraid that if the people started worshiping in Jerusalem, they would again decide it was time to unite and be one nation. Why have two nations and worship all in one place? That's my theory. It doesn't say it anywhere in the Bible, but I've always believed that. And for that reason, he built two calves, golden calves, like the ones that Moses' brother Aaron built on the trip from Egypt back to the Promised Land. And he built one in the north and one in the south. Now, we don't know what those calves look like, but these are artist renderings of some of the kinds of calves that you would find that people would worship. And they started worshiping not only those calves, but other foreign gods. After the captivity, and we'll talk about that in a few moments, when Israel was taken captive by the Assyrians. After that captivity, that part of the region became known as Samaria. And you find the same name today, but also during Jesus' time. And if you remember your history about how the people felt about the Samaritans, it was because they were a interbreeded mixture of people who were originally Jews and some people that the Assyrians brought in to stay with the Jews. They were not all Jews, and they were trying to live like Jews, and they were calling themselves Samaritans, and it was a mess. And the men that were reestablishing Judah later just pushed them aside. In 597, the Assyrian army took Israel off captive. Most never returned to the land. Where did they take them? Well, I don't know if I can get that. I don't know if that will show it. No, that one won't show it. Maybe we can find it. We're going to go here. This is out of order. Let's see. There's Palestine, and the northern half of it would have been Israel right there. And here, yeah, there's Nineveh right there. There's where the headquarters of the Assyrian nation was. But this area here was Assyria. I don't know if you know your geography well enough to look at this and try and lay over that a map of today's world. Well, Egypt is still Egypt. Palestine is still Palestine. We now call it the nation of Israel. Above it is Damascus. Damascus is still Damascus. Syria is still Syria. Nothing else is the same. They're down here in the bottom, where it says Assyrian Empire. It says Desert of Arabia. That's known as Arabia today, Saudi Arabia. Over here on the right where it says desert, that's mostly Iran. Up where Nineveh is, right up, get back to this one, right there, that's the middle of Iraq. That is known as Mosul now. And you can still, today, if you could get a pass to go to Iraq, you could go and dig around the ruins of Mosul, which is the ruins of Nineveh. Let me back up to where it was. Isaiah was one of God's major prophets to the southern nation, Judah. His name means God saves. Now, there were prophets in the southern nation and prophets in the northern nation working at the same time. In fact, as Isaiah is working, Micah is also a prophet. He's one of the minor prophets, and he's also being a prophet to the southern nation. In the north, this is the last days of Elisha. And there were, of course, Jonah went up to Nineveh, and many others. There were many others that were in there and are in there in both areas. But Isaiah is emphasizing the fact that God exists, the fact of God's authority, and the foolishness of ignoring his instructions. And this message was not written just for Judah. This was for everybody, including us. That's one of the great things about these prophets, is these prophecies and the things that they teach are things that we can still learn from and still use. Judah, let's see if I can say this the right way. You ever know anybody who has a good child and a bad child? Well, God had a good child and a bad child. He had Israel, which was the bad girl. And he had Judah, which was the good girl. And as time went along, Judah copied more and more and more of Israel and became worse and worse. In my daily reading in the Bible a couple of days ago, I ran across a section in Jeremiah that was, I don't know if I'd read it in public. It talks about how vile these two nations became. And eventually Judah became worse than Israel was. What it says here is pretty accurate. From the beginning, Judah rejected the foreign gods, but as time went on, they were attracted little by little, like a compass needle to a magnet, until they were even more corrupt than Israel had ever been. It was a very sad story and a sad thing to look at. Isaiah showed up at a time when the Assyrians were on the ascension. They were a big power, and the longer he lived, the bigger a power they became. They were just walking across the world. And I don't know enough history to be able to answer why they were so powerful or why they were so successful. Different nations had different reasons why they became the power nations. We know that the reason that the Greeks became a power nation was their formation, which they used in their battles, and they just overwhelmed everybody else with their formations. What the Assyrians did, we don't know. We do know this. They were proudly and horribly vicious. When they conquered somebody, they would lead them off captive, and they would strip their clothes off them, every stitch, and the clothes stayed behind. They would take and chain them in long chains with brass chains. They had a hook like a fish hook with barbs on it, went through the lower lip. Chain ran up to the neck of the person in front of them. If you fell, you were going to choke the person behind you and rip this thing out of your lip. They would march them across their country from where they took them, no matter which country they took them in. And they took them from all of these countries, all of these areas. They basically, as they came to a town, they'd stop and stand up some of the prisoners, some of these slaves, and they'd sell them. If you wanted that one, made them an offer, and they took the hook out, and you had them. And once you're a slave, they can do anything in the world with you, anything they want. They have power of life and death, anything they want. I know that about the Assyrians, but what else they had that made them so successful, I don't know. I do know that God told them to capture Israel. Now, how he told them, I don't know. But he did. He said that you're going to be the ones that are going to capture Israel. And they did. And God got angry with them because they were far more vicious than they needed to be in their capture. We've said this several times. Isaiah was a prophet. What do you think of when you think of a prophet? What's a prophet do? Foretells, and that's the most common thought of it. A prophet is simply a forth-teller, not just a foreteller. He was able to talk about past, present, and future with the same power. But he was an artesian well. He was bubbling full of God's word, and he could not contain it. You hear Paul talking about this, I believe in 2 Corinthians, the fact that he just couldn't contain what he has been given. And Paul reminds me very much of what we know about Paul, of these prophets. They couldn't keep it in. They had to tell it, they had to touch it, they had to do it. Some of the prophets, and you can remember Elijah and Elisha, raised the dead. Some of them did some other works that you think of stuff that Jesus did as well. In Isaiah 1:1, we read that a minute ago, the vision of Isaiah, the son of Amoz, concerning Judah and Jerusalem, which he saw during the reigns of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, kings of Judah. The reason that these kings are listed, they were kings of Judah. Now, they were also kings in Israel at the same time, different kings. And these other kings, it was during their reign too, but he doesn't mention them because he's talking to Judah. You'll hear people get confused between what it says here, Amoz and Amos. Amos was a prophet. He was one of the minor prophets. We don't know of any relationship between Amos and Isaiah. It was not a son of Amos. Isaiah was married, he had at least 2 sons. God told him what to name the sons, and he named them something to do with the coming back. Now I'm going to hit something that's going to be much more up in the air. Tradition. Everybody's got traditions. You get stories. I have a tradition in my family that somebody asked, how do you find the Giddings farm? And the postmaster told him, he said, listen, you just drive west on Highway 10 from Minoka to Coon Rapids, and when you stop seeing the telephone poles leaning, then that's where the Giddings farm is. And he said, well, why is that? And he said, because old Grotius Giddings, when he gets his mail and reads it on the way home, and he's hit every tree and mailbox and every telephone pole between here and his home. Whether that's a true story, I don't know. But it's a tradition that runs in my family, and it's fun to tell once in a while. There's a tradition that Isaiah was Uzziah's cousin. He was born probably about 750 or somewhere in that bracket, within 5 or 10 years, one side or the other. He did not study to be a priest, a prophet. God tapped him on the shoulder and told him he was going to be chosen. He is probably about 20 when he began his prophetic ministry, and he worked until he was killed. DAB. I have at home a Bible called the Dixon Analytical Bible. It's a magnificent Bible. I was instructed to buy one the day I started at Brown Trail School of Preaching, and I still use it, not a lot, but I still use it. It's King James, which is not my favorite, but it has huge numbers of magnificent notes. And this is right straight out of the DAB. Very little is known about the personal history of Isaiah. Tradition says he lived beyond the time of Hezekiah, that he was a member of the royal family. This is interesting, that he was a father-in-law of Manasseh. Does anybody remember who Manasseh was? Tell me. He was the most evil king that ever reigned in Judah. He was a direct son of Hezekiah. Hezekiah was one of the best kings that they'd ever had. But he was supposed to be the father-in-law of Manasseh, by whom he was sawn asunder. What does it mean to be sawn asunder? Anybody ever saw anything asunder? Come on, woodman. What do you saw asunder? It means cutting it in two. Oh yeah, I bet you have. No, that's an old King James word. Yeah, the 2 pieces. At least 2 pieces, yes, you're correct. I took this off of a different version, but they were sawn in 2. It's supposed to be the reference to the manner in which he met his death. Now, before we go any further, tradition says that they used a wooden saw. You ever used a wooden saw? Anybody ever seen a wooden saw? I thought about that a little bit, and I want you to be aware of the language that we're dealing with here. This is Hebrew. And like many other languages, they don't put nouns and vowels and verbs in the same order that we do. A wooden saw may simply mean a saw to cut wood. It might be as simple as that. But it does say a wooden saw, and that's something to be aware of. When you hear that tradition, it's there. The first of the Dead Sea Scrolls to be identified when they were found in the Qumran caves in 1947 was a complete scroll of Isaiah. Now, I want to talk about that for just a little bit. The Essenes, who were the ones that worked in the Dead Sea Scrolls and lived in the Qumran caves, were a faction of the Jewish people, and they were dedicated to preserving their Bible. And they made copies of it. They also were dedicated to kicking the Romans out and were part of the zealots that tried to kick the Romans out. But they preserved those scrolls that they made in jars and stuck them in these caves. There's, it's been a little while since I've done this research, so I'm coming off the top of my head, about 1,500 caves in the Qumran area, and all of them have not been completely explored. Most of them have been mostly explored, but not all of them. There may still be some stuff back in there. But there was also a group of Jews who believed in keeping the Dead Sea Scrolls pure, more in our time. I don't know when they started. I think about 1,000 or 1,500 after Jesus died. They were called the Masoretes. See the comment here? The existing text was the Masoretic text. And the Masoretes took extraordinary care and an unparalleled care to keep the text exactly the same as it had been in centuries past. As an example, they would have a group of people, you've seen the pictures where there's 20 different desks and everybody's over there copying exactly the same thing. They would go through and count the letters when they got done with each line. And if they didn't have the right number of letters for the right number of words, they would clean off that part of the scroll and start over. If it was too badly damaged, they would just throw it away. So they knew not only the number of words on the pages, the number of letters, the number of lines, and they used the same size page every time. So the Masoretic texts were photocopies, in essence. The only problem they had was when people had bad handwriting. That was their number one and real only problem. But when we got the Dead Sea Scrolls, the first thing they had to compare them with was the Masoretic scrolls. And they sat down and they compared them, and they were virtually identical. Now, if that doesn't give you some confidence in God's word and the care God took in taking care of his word, you need to do some more research, because that's astonishing that happened that clearly. He protected his word all the way from the early time to the end of the time. Okay. Now, we're not going to talk a lot about text today, but we're going to talk a little bit. We've read some of the other stuff. I'm going to start in Isaiah 6:1. In the year of King Uzziah's death, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, lofty and exalted, with the train of his robe filling the temple, and seraphim stood above him, each having 6 wings, and with 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, with 2 he flew. And one called to the other and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the foundations of the thresholds trembled at the voice of him who called out, while the temple was being filled with smoke. And then I said, Woe is me, for I am ruined, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. And I've seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a burning coal in his hand, which he had taken to the brass altar with the tongs. And he touched my mouth and said, Behold, this has touched your lips. Your iniquity is taken away. Your sin is forgiven. Think for a second. Isaiah became a prophet probably at about age 20. Uzziah reigned for, I believe it was 52 years. So his whole life, Uzziah has been the king. And suddenly in chapter 6, when he's maybe 30, 40 years old, Uzziah dies. This is the only man he's ever seen on the throne, and all of a sudden the throne is empty. And at the time that the throne is empty, he sees a vision of what? A full throne. A throne being sat on by Jehovah God himself. And God is in charge. Even though they've lost the earthly king, they still have a heavenly king who's in charge. And it's meant to give them some comfort, some trust, some confidence that they're going to be fine. They're going to be fine. We read of some of Isaiah's preaching before chapter 6. This is his call. Now, why he was preaching earlier, we don't know. Probably God called him in some other way at some other time. But there's another possibility. We don't know if this book is written chronologically or not. Nowadays, if you're writing a history, you start at point A, time period ABC, and you go year by year by year by year to the end. It's not the way that the Bible was written. And even though the Bible was not written that way, if the Bible was written that way, it was written so long ago that some of the pages may have gotten mixed up over the years. I don't know if you remember that King Hezekiah was cleaning the temple at one time. And some of the priests came in and said, "We found a copy of the law." Found a copy of the law? You mean they didn't have a copy of the law? No. They had literally lost it. And it was gone for who knows how long. And they brought it back. And they started following what God had told them to do. Now, the Old Testament was put together in the form that we know it right now, probably by Ezra, at the end of the New Testament, or the Old Testament as we have it now. And it's possible that God told him, put this in this order, or put this in this way. Or if he didn't tell him to do that, it's possible that he could have dropped a page or two and then just stuffed it back in somewhere. We don't know if it's chronological. It's not important whether it's chronological. It's accurate. It's what God told. The sheer number of topics that Isaiah speaks about between chapter 1:1 and 66:24 is staggering. There's hardly a religious subject that's not discussed in this book. I have always loved the book of Psalms because you can go to it for anything. If you're in pain, you can go to the book of Psalms. If you're in love, you can go to the book of Psalms. If you're in mourning, you can go to the book of Psalms. And there's something to say to all of it. Isaiah is like that, but it's not arranged simply by psalm by psalm by psalm. So it's harder to find stuff in there. And if you have not been studying the book of Isaiah, you may not find what you're looking for easily. Now I want to do some speculation and talk a little bit. We've studied and spoken and talked about the Jews being God's chosen people. And Isaiah refers to the Jews as God's chosen people at least 6 times in the book of Isaiah. What made a Jew become one of the chosen people? What did you have to do as a Jew to be one of the chosen people? Yeah, be born Jewish. That's it. Real tough, you know. A lot of choice in that one. Now here's the question. Did God specifically create every person that became a Jew? And I've got it written up here, and I'm going to just read it. Maybe a better way to ask the question is this: was God as careful in creating Gentiles during this time in history as he was creating Jews? Did God take special attention to the Jews' intelligence, strength, abilities, or were Jews and Gentiles equal back then from the beginning? What do you think? Okay. What do you base that on? Mm-hmm. Proselytes, yes. Right, right. Fine. Anybody agree, disagree? I agree with that, and mine is very similar to what yours was. When he sent his son to die, there were still Jews and Gentiles, and he sent him for everybody. He didn't just send him only for the Jewish nation. That's what the Jews believed for about 10 years, and that's the way it was taught for about 10 years. But within 10 or 12 years of Jesus' death, people like us, Gentiles, people who are not Jews, are involved. We are there. We're part of it, and we're accepted as fully, as completely, as cleanly as anybody else. I taught in a class some time ago that genetics rather, God is much stronger than genetics. What did God demand for a sacrifice? When he said, you're going to give a sacrifice, what did he demand? And? See it? Firstborn. And? I'm looking for something special. I better just tell you, best of the best. He wanted the best of the best. Hey, I was raised on a dairy farm, and my dad, he was probably one of the brightest men I ever know genetically. I watched him one time. Usually when a bull calf was born, we'd send it to South St. Paul for butchering. And that was it. And almost always those bull calves would come in and they'd be gone. And one day we had a calf born, and I said, you want me to call the guy, pick up the bull? And he said, Dad's literally standing there, walking around this calf, looking at him. This thing may be 3 days old, 4 days old, that's about it. He said, no, I think we're going to keep this one. And I said, oh, okay. We'd never kept a bull before. Why would you keep a bull? They don't give milk. What good's a bull? We had some of the best cows we ever had out of that bull. He kept that bull for breeding purposes and used him. He could look at that and know what the right genetics were. If God had said, that bull has to be sacrificed, my dad would have been upset. But God's power is more powerful than genetics. And even if I was out there in the pasture and chose the best calf or the best lamb that I had, I could be completely confident that God is going to still improve my herd. Because God's power is stronger than genetics. And that's something that, we look at these peoples today that are talking about how genetics and life is the strongest thing. No, and it's not evolution either. It's God. Comments, questions on this one before I go to the next thing? Got one other thing to talk about, I think, before we're done. Two things. There are some modern scholars. Now, if you've studied Isaiah, you've run across this, who have decided that Isaiah was written by either 2 or 3 different authors at different times, and then merged together later and called one book. Why? Because of the prophecies. This introduction to Isaiah is from a Bible that I own that I almost never used. Only chapters 31 through 39 can be assigned to Isaiah's time. It's generally accepted that 40 through 66 come from the time of the Cyrus of Persia and later. Why? Somebody have their Bible right at hand? They can open it up to Isaiah 44:28. Isaiah 44:28. And 45:1. Read them, please. When was this said? Compared to Cyrus. About 150 years before he was born. That's why people say there's more than one Isaiah. How could Isaiah possibly have known a man by name 150 years before he's born. The temple had not been destroyed and Jerusalem had not been torn down. Yes. All was standing, all was there. The people who read that must have gone, what is he talking about? And these modern scholars that reject prophecy are the ones that say Isaiah was more than one author. There's only one author. Yes. No, go ahead.
He was impressed that his name was in the book.
We think it was probably Nehemiah. I'm going to read you. This is second. Okay, give me a second. Get my page right here. 2 Chronicles 36:22. Now, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of God by the mouth of Jeremiah. Now, that's a mistake. It was actually Isaiah. The Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, the king of Persia, and sent him to a proclamation throughout the kingdom and put it in writing. Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord God of heaven has given me the kingdoms of earth, and he appointed me to build the house of Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Wherever there is among all you people, may the Lord his God be with him, and has sent him to go up. The first two verses of Ezra are exactly the same. Now, who it was that told Cyrus or showed Cyrus that passage? It may have been Nehemiah. Nehemiah was the cupbearer of the king. So, yeah, it may well have been Nehemiah. But it was one of those that was in the, almost certainly, it was one of those that was in the court of the king at the time, of Cyrus at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, yes. Yeah, there's no way around it. It's prophecy. The class is supposed to be over a quarter after we're done. 20 after, I got it. Okay, I got one more point. Let's try this. Okay. I'm just going to talk the bottom half of this. And this is, again, it may be belaboring the point we were right at. But remember, we think that Isaiah was born about 750 BC. He was sawn in two by Manasseh somewhere around 670 at age 80. Cyrus reigned in Persia in 596. Isaiah would have had to have been 154 and have been raised to the dead to have been there at that time. It's the only explanation modern scholars has come up with is there's more than one Isaiah. That's just. We'll finish this one. If you happen to believe the God of the Bible and God is omnipotent, omniscient, Jehovah that we worship, then perhaps you could believe that Isaiah was able to clearly, concisely, and perfectly predict the reign of a man who wouldn't be born for 100 years. A man who had sent the Jews home to the promised land at age 56. We do know how old Cyrus was when he did that. After he led his army and conquered the mighty Babylonian Empire. There's a Jewish tradition that Cyrus was shown the prophecy by, and here's another one of them, Daniel. It could have been any one of those men. And it's not only through the prophecy made by Isaiah before our class is through. But before our class is through, we'll talk about this and some of the other prophecies that were made. And we'll also talk about how everything fits together. Anything finally you'd like to ask me? I'll tell you right up front, I don't know. How's that? I appreciate your attention. I do. I hope that this has given you a thirst to look into this book. We got a lot of stuff to cover in here, and it is good stuff. So, thank you. I told you.